many more as well, that there's corruption and looting that's taking place in SAA. All I ask is give me the evidence, let's refer it to the relevant authorities, and let's have those matters investigated. Because none of us should agree that any kind of looting or corruption should take place in this or any other state entity, for that matter. Honorable Schlengwa is right that we need to go back to basics as far as SAA is concerned, and these are the early days of attempting to actually do so. But the one thing, Honorable Swart and others who have raised the question of guarantees, it's true, the guarantees do total about 20 billion rands. But please, let us not confuse the public by intentionally or otherwise communicating that a guarantee is a cash bailout. There's a difference between the two. A guarantee merely says that you are in a better position to borrow. You borrow at a cheaper rate. If you do default, the state has to bear the cost. But if you don't default, it gives you the privilege of actually borrowing money, excuse me, as SAA does. A cash bailout is where you actually inject equity into the airline. And none of the 20 billion rands that we're talking about is a cash bailout. It merely allows SAA to borrow money with the backup of a guarantee. Transnet has a guarantee of 350 billion rands. Many other state entities have these guarantees as well, and they total almost $500 billion rands. But the key is that you still need a financially well-managed airline or entity to ensure that there's no default in payment. Because if there is a default on payment, then the state and the fiscus becomes responsible for ultimately coping with the challenges that arise from that. I think it's also important, honourable members and chair, that we outline the facts as we found them earlier this year. Firstly, in governance terms, the board was in trouble. There were only 3 members of the board plus the 2 executive members. There were instances where 1 or 2 board members were actually signing letters. That's not the job of a board member. The board members should ensure that there's a strategy that's viable. They should ensure that their fiduciary responsibilities are carried out, but leave the day-to-day management of the airline to the managers of the airline and ensure that they are competent people to actually manage the airline. As far as management is concerned, there is clear indication that there was juniorization. Our responsibility and the new board's responsibility now is to ensure that we get competent managers as CEO and CFO, and that they are competent people who have the experience to form and enhance the strategy of SAA so that it does become financially competent and stable as opposed to a potential liability. There are doubts about the skills setup that we have within the management team, and that's something that we have begun to look at. The issue of stability in the airline was also a factor to take into account. And I think we owe it to the South African public that we be honest and frank and truthful about the financial status, status of the airline. So for the year 14-15, where the annual financial statements are about to be concluded, it is correct, there was a loss of 4.7 billion rands. For 15-16, according to the numbers I have, 1.8 billion rands. Total guarantees, 19 billion rands. Currently, there are probably 8 to 10 banks that have offered one or other kind of loan, most of it guaranteed loans, to the airline. And between the end of September and early next year, some 4 to 5 billion rands of these loans come up for payment. So the new board must ensure that they have a financial plan that will ensure that these loans are either paid or they're rolled over. And if they're to be rolled over, banks and other lenders to the airline, including the Treasury, will ask a very simple question. Are you going to reach a financial position where you can actually ensure that you are generating the cash to redeem some of these loans and reduce the loans to the airline itself? It is also correct to say that if we removed government guarantees and government support, technically SAA would be insolvent at this point in time. But it is a public asset. We can't allow a public asset to go to the ground. Our responsibility is to do the right thing and ensure that the turnaround strategy that is in place and partly implemented is now totally implemented. So we've appointed, in terms of the immediate steps that we are taking, we've appointed the new board, as you know. We've instructed the board to commence a new process for the appointment of a CEO and CFO. And once the CEO is in place, he or she has to assess what kind of team there is around this person and take responsibility for compiling and putting in place a competent management team that will ensure that the turnaround strategy is effectively implemented. We've asked the board to consider creating, and it seems they have agreed, a financial subcommittee or a finance subcommittee under the chairpersonship of the deputy chairperson, who is a qualified chartered accountant and a CFO in a big publicly listed company. And part of what we've offered as well, as you know, is the going concern guarantee of 4.7 billion rand so that the annual financial statements can be concluded. But that guarantee comes with a number of conditions that various honourable members have talked about. They have to, this finance committee and the board, as I said, will have to ensure that they understand fully what are the current loans that SAA has from the private sector, and reassure the people who are offering the loans and who will from time to time get nervous about the fact that SAA might not be run well, to ensure that they are reassured they reassure the lenders, and there's no question of any of the lenders, inverted commas, pulling the loan. They must finalize the 14-15 and 15-16 annual financial statements. Some of them are due in Parliament on the 15th of September, and they must make arrangements for those financial statements to be presented to Parliament itself. They must initiate a process of cost containment so that where there are excess costs and unwarranted costs, those costs must be brought under control. As I said, they need to make arrangements for financing of the 4.5 billion rands that comes up for payment between the end of September and January 2017, and excuse me, and ensure that as far as the Hong Kong authorities are concerned, that the annual financial statements that they require are provided to Hong Kong. Honourable Swart called the Hong Kong route a lucrative route. I'm afraid it isn't. Many of the long routes that the SAA travels are in fact neither lucrative nor profitable. And so that's one of the challenges that the airline has in recrafting its strategy. So the Hong Kong route at the moment is a loss maker, in fact. But regardless of that, if we have to continue with that route, we have to present the relevant statements that the Hong Kong authorities require. So these are some of the immediate things that the board is required to do. What do we expect of the board in the medium term? Firstly, maintain financial stability and credibility of the airline. Secondly, ensure that the manner in which the finances of the airline are managed does not constitute a risk to the fiscus. Because that is where investors, ratings agencies, and others are worried, that the SOEs, or some of them, and the way in which their finances are managed could become a liability on the state and increase the burden that the state has actually got to deal with. Secondly, ensure that the right corporate governance practices are both introduced and complied with. So non-executive directors, people who do not hold a full-time position within SAA, must not in any way interfere with the day-to-day operations of SAA. They might or might not have happened in the past. I'll leave the guess to you. Similarly, the executive directors, those in the full-time employ, the acting CEO, for example, those are the people that should worry about the day-to-day operations of SAA. Secondly, as part of corporate governance, make sure that they operate in terms of the laws of the country and the constitution of the country. And that compliance is absolutely critical, because no one should be, inverted commas, above the law. You're familiar with the phrase. As far as the turnaround strategy is concerned, it is important that the new board develops a sound business plan and a sound strategy, review the existing strategy to the extent it is necessary, ensure that there's a value proposition to customers of SAA, ensure that they review the routes to work out how they're going to balance the non-profitable routes with the profitable routes, so that ultimately the airline as a whole is profitable, and ask the question, what is going to differentiate SAA from other airlines that are traveling many of the same routes that SAA is traveling as well? And what kind of value proposition are they in fact going to offer? That follow, you're going to get a competent management team in place as well. The process of considering and reviewing whether SAA and South African Express is going to be consolidated or not.
Minister of Finance Pravin Gordhan briefing there inside Parliament with regards to challenges faced by South African Airways. Earlier we saw the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, Julius Malema, take aim at Dudunyeni, stating a number of factors there. The Minister of Finance, though, discussing, debating issues facing the airliner, what can be changed with regards to the board and the board members and how those should function independently. We've got our eye on the story. We've also got an NSM reporter on the ground who will be unpacking all of those details for us in a short while.